So you want to start winning some Pokemon card games? I got you covered. These are going to be the top 10 Pokemon card decks for 2024. And yes, I'm uploading this just a couple days before 2024. I want to be ahead of the curve this time because usually I'm a little late. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Christian. I am halfway to my World Championship invite this year, and I pretty much got all my points with Miraidon EX. I am a Miraidon maniac, I like to say. For this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my top 10 Pokemon decks for 2024 in order of how strong I believe they are. Best of all, I'll be sharing with you guys some top tier deck lists for all of these different decks. The common question of the day is, what was your favorite deck you played this year in 2023? Let's get into a couple of honorable mentions that really performed amazingly in a huge 3,000 player Pokemon tournament in Kyoto, Japan just the other day. I'm not going to get into too much detail about these decks, but I do want to spotlight them and share the list with you guys in case you want to try them out for yourself. Maybe you're a fan of these particular Pokemon. Starting off, let's talk about Golden Go EX with Palkia VSTAR. This deck just popped off at the tournament and it got 4th place overall. This is probably the best way to play Chi String Man EX if you've been dying to play him at a highly competitive level. Next up, we have to mention Arceus Zeraora. Yes, this is an actual Arceus pile, which really popped off as well, and I love Zeraora VMAX and VSTAR having the flexibility of a evolved V Pokemon you can attack into, and you can even use the VSTAR attack if you don't end up using Starbirth, or you can use Starbirth to set up perfectly. This deck looks like a lot of fun, and I'll probably be playing it pretty soon at some locals. And in terms of ranking, this deck got top 8 out of that 3,000 player plus tournament. The last honorable mention would have to be Iron Valiant Entei. This list is really strong. It actually got 2nd place at LAIC, and in the most recent tournament in Kyoto, it got top 8, and in San Antonio, it got 18. Now let's get into what I believe are going to be the top 10 Pokemon decks for 2024. Also, just a disclaimer, if your deck that you really love isn't on this list, I'm sorry. Sucks to be you. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can with this list. I will be doing a top 10 anti-meta or top 10 rogue deck video as well. So if you want to see some really fun, cool, creative decks like Alakazam EX or Meowscarada EX, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. But with that said, let's get to number 10. Coming in at number 10 is a deck I like to call Dark Miraidon or Team Rocket's Miraidon. It is Roaring Moon EX. Yes. Roaring Moon EX is still pretty competitive, so much so that it actually got 2nd place in that huge major tournament in Kyoto, Japan. Typically, from what we've seen from a lot of North American and European players, is we don't see Darkrai and Darkrai VSTAR in the list, and this might be what made the list really pop off. Darkrai VSTAR is a really great alternate attacker. Other than Roaring Moon, you're pretty much main attacker, and then you also get more Peko in there for a single prize trade option with a free retreat ability. Now, Darkrai VSTAR is amazing because it has this VSTAR ability that lets you recycle 2 of your used items in your discard pile. So you can grab amazing cards like Dark Patch, Cross Switchers, what else is in there? Switching card options. There's great options in this list. There's a lot of items to choose from. Roaring Moon EX, I'm not too crazy about it myself. I'm personally a Miraidon player. If I'm going to play a turbo deck, it is always going to be Miraidon, but if you want to dabble into the dark side, this is a list you absolutely need to try out, and I'm going to be trying it out myself over this next couple of weeks. Coming in at number 9, we have the deck that came in 1st place in Stuttgart, Germany. I think I pronounced that correctly. Piloted by Christian Fontenot, it was SableZard. Yes. Lostbox with Radiant Charizard. This deck is a menace. It is a single prize terror, I want to say. It is kind of tricky, you know, when you do have to play against certain decks like Rapid Strike Urshifu and Miraidon with Iron Hands EX, but this deck is very much capable and can hang with the big dogs. This deck, of course, utilizes the consistency that is the Lost Zone engine with very cheap attackers to attack with, like Cramorant, Sableye, and of course Radiant Charizard being the biggest hitter in this deck. So whether you're sprinkling damage on the board with Sableye, or getting 1 to 2 shot KOs with Cramorant, or just using Radiant Charizard to do these big 1-hit KO options, potentially on Pokemon that have been weakened up prior, this deck is very strong, and it's one of those decks as well that really reward the players who play it a lot and have a lot of experience with the Lost Zone engine. I think Christian Fontenot also said that he really never played the deck too much before winning the Germany regionals. He was kind of like learning as he went during the regionals, which is kind of insane because he won the tournament. So this deck's really strong. It's always been a strong deck in the format. So if you want to still rock with the Lost Zone engine, SableZard is one of the best ways to play it. Coming in at number 8, we have a starter deck. We got Palkia VSTAR. Not the actual 60 cards only from the starter deck. It has a couple other cards from like another starter deck, like the Ice Rider starter deck. Palkia Ice Rider is in a fantastic spot right now. If you're able to dodge one of the hardest and most popular matchups in the game, which is Miraidon EX, this deck is actually very, very capable. Its most recent highest placement at a major tournament was in San Antonio Regionals, which was like a 2,000 player tournament. It got 3rd place, piloted by Joseph N. Palkia has always been a very strong deck from the start because it not only is a Pokemon that has a very strong attack, but it also has its energy acceleration built into it with its V-Star power. It's a deck that can set up very consistently because you have amazing supporter cards in it, like Melanie, which accelerate energy and you draw 3, or like Irida, where you can grab an item and then a water Pokemon. That's just kind of insane. So the fact that you're going to be able to run this deck with 4 VIPs, 4 cross switchers, you got Roxanne in here too, Spiritomb for those harder Mew matchups, you got Radiant Greninja as well for acceleration of energies into your discard, but also as a double sniping attacking option. Now the main way you're going to be able to counter harder decks or harder matchups like Miraidon is going to be with Ice Rider Calyrex, because Ice Rider, well, is an ice type Pokemon, but in the game it's a water Pokemon. But because it is a ice type Pokemon, its actual weakness is metal Pokemon, and there's like no metal Pokemon in the game other than Golden Go. All you really need is one Palkia V-Star to really put in the work, get that energy acceleration going, and you can really do some damage. Coming in at number 7 is a deck that a lot of you guys probably hate. This deck is a menace to society. We're talking, you probably can guess what it is by now. We're talking about Snorlax Stall. Calvin Connor, I want to say one of the top players in the game at the moment, also signed to the Shuffle Squad, piloted this deck to 5th place at the San Antonio Regionals, and I believe he went undefeated for the entire day 1. If you're an opponent playing against this deck and you don't have an answer to it, or you're inexperienced, or you prized your important cards in the matchup against it, it can absolutely destroy you in a very slow and painful way. Similar to burn decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this deck will just destroy you with your resources, get rid of your options to attack, and you just have to sit there and be miserable. And that's why a lot of people hate playing against this deck, because it's not a deck that wins by conventional manners of taking prize cards. It's a deck that wins by depleting your enemy's resources that are very crucial, including being able to just attack with the Pokemon they want to attack with. This deck has so much disruption involved with it. You got cards like Misfortune Sisters, you got Erica's Invitation, Avery, Giacomo, Sydney. There's just a lot of annoying cards in this deck. So if you want to be annoying, or maybe you already are annoying and want to find a really cheap, fun, diabolical deck to play, Snorlax Stall is a great option. However, if you do end up playing against very, very experienced players, or just players that really know what they're doing and how to play against the matchup, you kinda are gonna have a rougher time, because this deck really does prey upon more inexperienced players, or just, you know, players who can't draw in the ways that they want to, because this deck, again, has a lot of disruption with it involved. So let's get to the next list. Just talking about this list makes me sick. Number 6 is a deck that used to be the best deck in format for a long time, and then came Paradox Rift, and Paradox Rift said, not anymore, buddy. We're talking about, you guessed it, Gardevoir EX. Gardevoir, still one of the best decks. It has a really fantastic matchup spread, and it also has amazing comeback mechanics involved in the deck. So whether you're starting off the game winning or starting off the game losing, this is a deck, when piloted by the right players who knows how to play it properly with the right lines of play, there's a lot you can do with this deck. You can never count yourself out with it, and that's why a lot of players love this deck, including top players. That's why it was like the most popular deck going into the Latin American International Championships. But when you have decks out here now involving Iron Hands EX, which take 2 prizes instead of 1 for knocking out a Pokemon, which is really easy to succumb to in this deck. You have a lot of weak single prizers. The power level for Gardevoir decks definitely go down. Not only that, but the harder matchups it has to face up against, like I want to say Charizard, Rapid Strike, and Miraidon, those decks are at a all-time high in terms of popularity. That's why you didn't see Gardevoir top 8 in San Antonio, even though it's such a good deck. There is some great additions though I want to mention. You do have great cards in here now, like Scream Tail, you also have the new Luxurious Cape, and you also have Zacian V as well, which is another great attacker in this deck. And if you're still playing Gardevoir after these several weeks and months of Gardevoir not being as amazing as it once was, you most likely are a very hardcore Gardevoir fan. Or you're really stubborn and you think you can just outskill your opponent every time, because this is definitely a deck where if you're very skilled, you can just, you know, put in work and do your thing. It's a really strong deck, but it's number 6, and it's a number 6 for a reason. Number 5, people like to call a Lost Pile, Lost Tord Pile, Lost Iron Moon Ogre, and that is, well, this Lost Pile that is actually destroying people's hopes and dreams. It actually took first place at that huge Champions League in Kyoto. So here is the list. I think it is the best way to play Lostbox outside of Lost Tina, which we're going to talk about later into this video. It is very strong, but it is not for the faint of heart. This is a deck you really need to have a lot of practice with. This deck has some fantastic options and answers to a lot of the top tier decks out there. You have Roaring Moon EX with a great 1-hit KO option attack and just a very strong attack in general. You have Iron Hands EX for taking some bonus prize cards, and then you also have Kyogre to close out games. And I've lost games recently to this Kyogre because I didn't even realize decks were playing Kyogre again. So yeah, if you're very skilled, this is one of those decks that reward the highest level of skill. And of course it is using the Lost Zone engine, so you also get to really annoy your opponent with cards like Cramorant and Sableye. Yeah, this deck's nuts. And again, it just won one of the biggest like Pokemon tournaments ever, 3,000 players in Kyoto. Now, before we get to number 4, I just realized I kind of forgot one of the decks I would really like to put in the top 10, and it's just not even here. So we're just gonna give it a quick honorable mention, and that's because there's been a huge target on its back recently, preventing it from doing super well. We're talking about Mew VMAX. There's 2 ways you can play Mew VMAX. There's the Fusion Strike version, and there's also the Double Turbo version. And I personally played the Double Turbo version in San Antonio, and I got destroyed. But I want to say, if you are playing Mew, the better way to play it is likely going to be the Fusion Strike version with Fusion Strike attackers like Malouetta, Ice Cube in there as well. And there's just so much Spiritomb floating around right now in decks. A lot of decks are teching in 1 Spiritomb, and it just makes the lives of Double Turbo Mew players miserable. But Fusion Strike energies, when attached to Genesect, does turn off Spiritomb's ability, so you are immune to the tech that everyone's playing to counter Mews. Now let's get to the Elite 4 now. Number 4, we got Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, or Rapid Strike Toolbox. The highest placing list for Rapid Strike that did well at a major recently was played by Landon Cattler at San Antonio, getting 9th place. Rapid Strike is a deck that also has a fantastic matchup spread right now. It really does bully a lot of decks that need to have setup with smaller Pokemon like Charizard, like Gardevoir, like Lostbox. And of course, you get to hit for weakness against decks like Miraidon. It's a deck that can at sometimes struggle to set up, but when you have amazing cards in the deck like Octillery, where you're able to search out exactly the Rapid Strike card you want every single turn you want, cards like Spiritomb to basically be your counter to Mew VMAX decks out there. You have Inteleon VMAX with the Double Gunner ability, which is very annoying. Medicham V for Yoga Loop in there for some bonus turn-taking actions. Rapid Strike Toolbox is a deck you have to respect. You're probably going to see a couple players play it at your locals, and even here locally, I've been seeing an uptick in popularity for this deck. I haven't really seen players perform poorly with it. Whenever I see Rapid Strike players, even if it's not a ton of them, these Rapid Strike players are definitely like making it to the top tables, or close to the top tables at least. Like in this case, we got 9th place in San Antonio. On to number 3, we're going to talk about Lost Giratina VSTAR, the deck that finally, I think this might be one of the best metas you can play Giratina VSTAR, and the best way to play it is with the Lost Zone engine. Now, the big thing that really makes this deck pop off right now is the ability to Roxanne and Counter Catcher in that mid to late game scenario. Being able to stall your opponent out and drag up a Pokemon they don't necessarily want to be active, or one you really want to knock out, and also disrupt them with Roxanne and also with cards like Path to the Peak. It is a very good deck. It's also one of the few decks that does play Path to Peak, which is a really great stadium that does hard counter a lot of decks out there. So a lot of decks have to play an answer to Path to the Peak, whether it be their own counter stadiums or copies of Lost Vacuum. This deck does of course have Radiant Greninja, but at times you don't even need Radiant Greninja to be an attacker, or you don't even need the Concealed Card's ability to accelerate your go through your deck, because the pros of just playing Path to the Peak to cripple your opponent's abilities is so so good. Like, just dropping Path turn 1 is kind of nutty, and any deck that can get away with doing that is going to be in a pretty great position in this current meta. The list I'm sharing with you guys right now is played by Grant Hayes, and it got second place at the San Antonio Regionals. And although this deck didn't pop off at the Kyoto Big Champion League tournament, it is still dominating a lot of the smaller tournaments in Japan. If you go to those Japanese websites with all those lists, you'll see that Giratina VSTAR is not only very popular, but it is very, very good at getting like the top 4 placements consistently. So it's very strong right now. If you're playing Giratina, you probably understand that one of the hardest matchups is yourself, the inner conflict you have of setting up. Giratina is a deck that can brick, and those bricks can be very painful. But not all decks are immune to bricking, you know. Some decks like Miraidon have an easier time not breaking because they have consistency built into cards itself, like Miraidon. But any deck, of course, that does rely on setting up with cards like VIP Pass, there's going to be some iffy games where you just don't really get set up. But when you do get set up, this deck can really get the ball rolling, and it just like snowballs. It just keeps going. You set up 2 Giratinas, you're cooking, you're in a good spot. Next up, let's get to number 2. Number 2 is kind of like a tie because there's 3 different versions to play this deck. All of them are seeing really strong equal success, and for different reasons. I'm actually going to be doing a guide on the 2 different ways, I want to say the main 2 different ways to play the deck, coming soon. And you guessed it, we are talking about Miraidon EX. Yes, I told myself I'm not going to be biased, and I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I think Miraidon is the second best deck in the game. My favorite deck, the one I play all the time, is number 2, not number 1. 3 different versions of this deck I mentioned earlier. There is the Path version, which is considered the standard version. There's the Turbo version, which is the, gotta go fast, you just dominate real quick at the start of the game. And then there's the middle, which is, I would call the hybrid version. So first off, let's just quickly talk about the Path, or the standard version, which Juho Kalma played at the Latin American International Championships to get first place, and he also played it at the Gdansk Poland Regionals to get 9th. This is the exact 60 card list that I actually used to win my first ever Pokemon Cup. So if you want to see that Pokemon recap vlog of my first Cup win, check it out. It's on the channel. It's very strong. Again, it's a deck that does get to play Path to the Peak. You get set up really consistently. You got Iron Hands in there too. Fantastic. Next up, we're going to talk about the Turbo version, which is the most popular way to play Miraidon right now, and is the highest placing list right now for Miraidon we've been seeing in Japan. In Japan, this is the most popular way to play it. I want to say 80% of Miraidon players are playing a Turbo version of it. In San Antonio, piloted by Nick Robinson to get 7th place. This is his list that he used. Not only did Nick Robinson get 7th place at the San Antonio Regionals with this list, but the other top 6 highest placing Miraidons were all Turbo versions. Not Path, not a hybrid. They were all, maybe some hybrids, but they were all like Turbo versions. So Turbo is something we're going to have to look into and play more and more of. A lot of people are asking me, which version do I like the most? And honestly, I can't give you a proper decision because I have way too many hours in standard and Path version, but not enough in Turbo. So if I'm going to give you guys an opinion, I want it to be well informed. And right now, I just can't make up my mind. As for the hybrid version, I got 2nd place in Germany, piloted by Simon T. It has both Path stadiums and non-Path stadiums in there too. So it's a little bit of the best of both worlds, you could say. And if you're conflicted of like which version to play, the hybrid one might be the one you want to go with. Again, all these different versions of Miraidon are fantastic for different reasons. The Path version and the hybrid versions do have a harder matchup against decks like Rapid Strike Urshifu, but the Turbo version that Nick Robinson played with 2 Mews in it, it actually destroys Rapid Strike Urshifu. So if you're playing in an area with a lot of Rapid Strike, then the Turbo version might be the one you want to play with. On to number 1. Number 1 is a deck that shouldn't come as a surprise to you guys. I haven't talked about it really at all this video, and if you've just been playing Pokemon at all, you would know not only is this probably one of the most popular decks out there, but it's the most popular because it is the best deck in the format, and I think that's pretty much undisputed. We're talking about the deck that got first place in San Antonio Regionals, or at the San Antonio Regionals, piloted by Azul GG. We got Charizard EX. Charizard, not only is it a collector's favorite, it is a competitor's favorite as well. And not only did Azul get first place, but he also had to play a mirror match against his own teammate in top 4, and that was a 60 card mirror match, so the exact same 60, I believe, they used to play against each other. And it was one Charizard guaranteed to get into the grand finals, where Azul did end up beating Lost Tina in that set. Charizard is amazing. It's one of those decks that can just steamroll once you get those Charizards set up. Sometimes it can be a little sketchy, sometimes setting up when it comes to like bricking. It has the same kind of bricking issues that other decks have, like Lost Tina, where you brick maybe 25 or 30% of the games or so. But honestly, if you're playing it right, if you know what you're doing, you can pop off with it. The version that Azul decided to play was the Pidgeot version, which has amazing synergy with the Charizard EX, of course, because you're going to be using rare candies to evolve your Charmanders, but now you also got rare candies to evolve your Pidgeys. The skill ceiling for this deck is quite high. If you really know your 60, you can really do well with it. And actually, my friend Sasha Air9 and a new teammate for Comfy Hobbies, he won a challenge yesterday using the Charizard deck that Azul won with. It's a deck that your opponent gets punished for taking prize cards, which is like the win condition for pretty much most of the decks out there. It's so annoying for us Miraidon players because our deck is all about taking prizes and taking prizes fast. But the quicker we're taking prizes and taking prizes fast, the stronger we're making your Charizard. So Charizard is just such a good deck right now. If you're not playing Charizard, make sure your deck has a way to counter it, or at least have an answer to respond to it in one way or another. People are teching in cards like Devolution. People are teching in cards like Tapu Koko EX for Paralysis. If you enjoyed this video, click on screen to check out the San Antonio regional vlog, part 1 or part 2, to see all the drama that went down. And if you guys want to see my fun adventures in Japan, you can click down here as well.